what our perspective is, things that we're seeing in the industry, things that, our observations, and how that might apply to you, how you can kind of look back to the business and what those efforts might look like internally, whether you're, already down that journey, if it's something that you're looking to do, if you're looking to do better, and just kind of align with, again, what we're kind of seeing out there in the field. So a little bit about me. I've been in the IT industry about 15 years or so. The last 7+ years in various architect roles, enterprise architecture, solution architecture, things of that nature. The last probably 5 years or so being in customer-facing roles. My background is in data center and systems design. The last 5+ years really been focused on designing and automating the software-defined data center and cloud. So whether that's on-prem or public cloud platforms. I got some certs. I read a lot of tech books, and if anyone's a social creature, my handle is bscripter, and that's probably across the board. I try to keep it consistent. So Twitter, GitHub, and various Slack community workspaces, you name it. That's typically where you can find me publicly. So what's on the agenda? So 4 kind of areas that I want to touch on, and I don't want to kind of inundate everybody with some really long drawn out. So I'm going to try to keep this concise and valuable. I'm going to stay away from talking too in depth about brands and particular technologies and tools, and more so around automation as it relates to the business. So automation state of the union, we'll kind of go over, again, what we're seeing. Automation foundation, so the importance of kind of covering the bases as you start down that journey and what we've seen successful in the field. Business transformation as it applies to automation, and then the concept of everything as a service. So for you further down that transformation path, and what as a service, what does that mean to you in the business? I really wanted to kind of summarize everything into one objective as far as takeaways once we get to the end of the deck. And ultimately, if I do things right, I'd like you to have a better understanding of automation, industry trends, what it might mean for you, your team, and why it's important to your business. Automation state of the union. So first, I'm going to hit some terminology level setting, right? So we kind of categorize things, automation, orchestration, integration. So automation, a lot of people are already doing this, and whether you're an infrastructure person or a manager, team manager, director level, these are things that are typically happening in most places, at least at some level. So scripting a set of device level tasks to take the human element out of it manually, and these can be manually or automatically triggered. And the focus is shortening the work time for those tasks. So the amount of time it takes to actually perform that task, or that you have to be focused on performing that task. Orchestration is really about executing a sequence of automated tasks across different systems. You're driving automation across multiple devices in a defined set process. And here we're kind of focused on reducing the total lead time of a given process. So how much time it takes to actually get there before you're executing that task. And then we also like to think of this as governance and compliance for device level automation. So we're kind of going a step further than device level or low level automation, and we're kind of wrapping some kind of a policy around that. And then integration, what we mean when we talk about this is more about APIs plugins, integrating different platforms, or as you start defining your infrastructure as a service, what that means as far as those systems talking to one another. And really, this is required component for orchestration. Okay, we're going to get into tiers of automation, and based on what we've seen with our customers, and how we approach things from a technical expertise level, we kind of break things down into 3 different categories. At the top, we have what we call enterprise service automation or enterprise service automation platform. And this is your automation orchestration of business processes, right? So an example would be something that maybe isn't technically focused, like onboarding a new user, right? So the business, you have a new user or a new employee, and there's a number of things that new employee has to have. They have to have an account created, they have to have access to email, they have to have access to HR systems, or you name it, X number of systems, they need a new laptop. All those things are from a business, more business process, enterprise process focused. They're controlled by enterprise service management platforms, and some of these include things like ServiceNow, Cherwell, Microsoft, BMC, HP, IBM, all name brands that have different products in this space. If we move down one level, we have the IT service automation platforms. So this is an IT is usually a consumer in this space, and IT is also the provider. Here we have automation orchestration of things like virtual infrastructure, operating systems, applications, system configuration management. They're built to natively integrate with common IT services and applications. Some examples here are VMware vRealize Automation, Microsoft System Center, OpenStack, Docker, Kubernetes, Puppet, Ansible, Chef, Terraform. I mean, the list really kind of goes on and on what people are using in the field that meet their business requirements. And then at the bottom here, we have our device automation or device automation platform. Here again, IT is the consumer and the provider. And here we're at this tier, we're automating physical devices. So things like network storage, servers, IoT, physical systems. And here they're built to natively integrate with common IT hardware and infrastructure platforms. So some examples of different tools that we're seeing: Ansible, Terraform, Packer, various languages that are driving a lot of this stuff: PowerShell, Go, we had SaltStack. Again, lots of things here that we see in our customer base. So where does that, as far as automation, and where does that align with industry trends, and what are we seeing as far as more specifically successful trends around automation? And so these are some of the things that we actually see as real trends that are value add. So automation is improving service availability and reliability through eliminating human error. We're able to scale the infrastructure without increasing the team size. So again, everybody is constantly being asked to do more with less, right? So we're shifting that labor away from firefighting type tasks and moving that over to more higher value type tasks that the business can actually benefit from. We're improving the speed of delivery and capitalizing on market opportunities. So depending on what your business is, depending on what industry it is, this means different things, but ultimately the speed of delivery and time to deliver dramatically decreases, leveraging automation. Capture institutional knowledge through staff changes over time. So institutional knowledge, once you start getting more mature down the automation path, you end up just naturally coming out with things like your infrastructure starts to become self-describing, self-documenting. So you're pulling all of that institutional and tribal knowledge out of people's heads and putting that in some format that is consistent and shareable with everybody else on the team. So whether it's staff changes, and that doesn't necessarily mean people leaving the company or quitting, it can mean the business and organization is transforming. So those people are changing roles. Maybe your teams, you're going to maybe more of a DevOps focus. So you're bringing folks that aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily in tune with that particular process or platform that you're automating with. You can bring them in, and now they have a consistent way to actually learn what's going on, and it's much easier to scale, even from a staff standpoint. Improve service quality and IT business relationships by shifting to a service broker operating model. So we'll get into this a little bit later too, but it's kind of breaking down the silos, not only within your teams and the people sitting next to you, if you're in an operations type role. So it's not necessarily, the networking, the server team, storage, security team, not necessarily breaking down just those, but also reaching across or up the aisle and saying, hey, let's understand what our business requirements are, and let's try to better align what we're doing from an automation perspective to help them with whatever challenges they're having. So really about understanding and engaging that business relationship and helping it foster and align it more with what's going on from an IT perspective. And then enable a reduction in IT and business operating expenses. That's really where automation shines. It's going to drive your operating expense way down, just from, obviously a lot of things we just mentioned here and then more. So moving into automation foundation, understanding your business. So we kind of came up with a operating maturity model, and we have 3 different tiers that we like to categorize businesses when we go in and talk with customers. And at the bottom here, we have a technology provider level. And as you move up the maturity level, and which is on the left, we have business value on the right. You're kind of gaining more value as you move up and mature through this curve. And every business is in a different place, when we talk to customers, and and every team might even be at a different place. But it's important to kind of level set, and we find that this is the best way to kind of approach and assess where you're at now as far as what business industry you're in, your requirements, and where you want to go, and kind of mapping out what that means for you. So at the bottom here, we have technology provider level. So this is typically we see the customer's current state being things like they're invested in virtualization technology, but they're not necessarily automating everything. They're running traditional, legacy infrastructure, or their teams are structured that way. And by that, I mean, your typical compute, storage, network, security. There's no service catalog that's in place yet. So no one is going and requesting IT or even requesting services, whether that be IT or business, from an actual catalog. Operationally, still very reactive, right? So lots of firefighting. That's, most people are spending a lot of their time just fighting fires and not necessarily doing or spending any time on any kind of proactive efforts. And from a business perspective, IT is viewed as a cost center by the business and not necessarily a business partner. At the service provider level, so here you're automating, and the current state of customers that we're seeing here, they're shifting towards being more of a service provider. So you're leveraging orchestration across multiple technology disciplines and platforms. You kind of have the basics of infrastructure as a service, maybe the basis of some type of service catalog is defined, at least for some parts of the infrastructure. You're developing more sophisticated service, or at least looking into it, like platform as a service, database as a service, to kind of move more towards focusing on, we have like an 80-20 rule that we like to follow, but focusing more on standardizing 80% of everything you do and automating it 80% of all of your different processes. And then they're also kind of learning Scrum, Agile, and how that applies to the SDDC and things like that from an operations standpoint. At the very top, we call these businesses digital enablers, right? So they're kind of in the transformative phase. And here we're kind of seeing IT from the business is transforming and is becoming a true business partner and no longer just a cost center. So they're actually improving business agility. They're tied closely with the business. Their operations are heavily automated. You know, DevOps, IT as a service, containers and microservices are proliferating once you kind of get to this space. You're fully operating as what we call service broker. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service are fully mature. There's, you know, a catalog that's, you know, fairly mature. And most things are provisioned and requested via self-service. So what are some of the common business drivers that we've seen? And there's way too many to kind of to break down and list, but I focused on 4 here that are fairly consistent across everybody that we've been talking to. So speed, risk, scale, efficiency. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but some of the things I think that businesses are often focused on. So speed wins, right? As you start moving up that maturity model and you start understanding businesses, and of course it depends on what industry you're in, every industry is different. But the ability to innovate, experiment, deliver faster, as the business sees IT, again, as a digital enabler, speed becomes key. And again, depending on what industry you're in, it's a true differentiator from a competitive standpoint. Risk, everybody's looking for things to reduce risk. So stability, availability, durability, security, some of the top things that kind of fall into that category. But from an automation perspective, these are things that we can define and remove that human element and improve in all of these areas by leveraging automation to drive consistency up along with all the things mentioned here. Scale. So the ability to scale up and down applications or capacity on demand. Again, something that might not be necessarily applicable depending on the industry or depending on the requests. But, you know, on the other hand, a lot of times once we start having these conversations with operations teams or even sometimes development teams, they're so heads down on firefighting that when we start helping them broker conversations with those different business units, you know, we oftentimes find opportunities where, you know, they're looking at other solutions outside IT, you know, shadow IT, to actually deliver what they need from an infrastructure perspective. And, you know, maybe not even knowing that we had a capability or understanding what capabilities need to exist in the infrastructure that we currently have in order to meet their requirements. Maximize efficiency of existing infrastructure. Again, so in the scale category, kind of right along the same line, more with less, but on the infrastructure side. So the ability to scale up and down, maximize those resources. This is pretty big in containers and microservices as your existing infrastructure kind of further gets, you know, abstracted and sliced up into many other different pieces. It becomes, you know, very much about efficiency. And from an efficiency standpoint, organizationally, CIOs always asking teams to continually do more with less, right? We want to drive OpEx down. We want to take advantage of what we have. We want to be more efficient, and we want to reduce manual effort and human error, which I've talked a lot about. Okay, business transformation. So as far as preparing for transformation, what we see in a lot of customers that are early, we'll refer back to the maturity model, they are mostly custom today, right? So I mentioned the 80-20 rule. So we have a pyramid, and at the bottom, you have custom, all of your snowflakes. You know, everything we deploy is kind of a snowflake, it's a custom build, and they have all these requirements from the business or another third-party vendor, whatever the case may be. And as we move up, we kind of have custom / standard, and then we have standard at the very top, which is the smallest part. And as far as transformation goes, we need to move more towards standardized and predefined services. So we go from, on the left, 80% being the very bottom to only a very small part, 20% being the top. We want to leverage automation to flip that model upside down. So 80% of everything you deploy should really be standard. And at the very bottom, only 20% would make up that custom or, snowflake-based deployment. So a lot of things in the industry here, the pets versus cattle, t-shirt sizing. So, a lot of people say, oh, well, I can't, we have all these, there's no way we can do that. We can't deploy standard sizes for everything. That kind of goes against being efficient. And in some cases that is true, but in a lot of cases, by providing that standardization, you're actually reducing the overhead in managing all of those custom configurations. And that alone is enough to recoup and focus that time elsewhere on more valuable things, that the small deviation, outside the little knobs that we can tweak to make it custom, that at the end of the day, that's way more valuable than trying to custom fine tune everything that that the people are deploying. So rethinking the way you kind of deploy and manage IT. So here we see the different tiers of automation. So we have enterprise service automation, IT service automation, device automation. We kind of try to tell our customers to start, I like to say API first mentality, right? So you have, and on the right, we have just different examples of platforms and integrations that we're seeing, device automation, network storage, compute IoT, IT service automation, IPAM, maybe virtualization platform, database, containers, firewall, load balancers, public cloud, infrastructure as a service. And then at the top, we have procurement, project management, asset management, CMDBs. And so how do you, from an automation standpoint, it becomes critical to understand all these components and kind of make decisions and understand how they work from an API perspective, because that leads you to integration with all the different pieces and parts. So as you move from device automation and up to IT service automation, where you need to orchestrate what that integration is with all these different components becomes critical to how you interact and what that deployment pipeline ends up looking like. So again, it's very different from a traditional IT operations mindset, and every business is at a different place. But as we move up that maturity model, this becomes a very critical concept to understand and start to take advantage of throughout the decision-making process, particularly when it comes to the different technology and platforms that you have on the floor. So what are some of the transformational challenges? And a lot of this stuff is probably things that are fairly obvious, and maybe that's good. It's validation for stuff that you might have heard or maybe haven't heard. So I'm going to break it down: people, process, technology, right? So people, difficult to find talent, overcoming internal cultural differences. From a process standpoint, development methodology, shifting to agile. So a lot of companies, their developers are changing the way they develop applications for example. So moving from a monolithic application architecture to a microservices-based architecture, that's driving a process change there. And we've seen a lot of what we call shadow IT. But a lot of companies are going to and experimenting with public cloud because they can't get those capabilities on-prem. And a lot of times they're looking to shift that back on-prem, and operations teams, for example, are kind of being forced by the business to learn some of these new methodologies and practices in order to help meet the new needs of the business as far as the infrastructure they've been maintaining. Balancing innovation with governance, right? So it's about kind of speed to market, innovating, delivery. We talked about that. But now also, okay, so now we understand what we want to do and how we want to do it. But now we need to, have a way to wrap some governance and policy around that, and that's can become particularly challenging. Technology, tools, right? I touched on a little bit earlier about each of those tiers of automation, but there's an endless sea of tools out there, and there's no one tool that does everything. And we like to help customers understand what tools they have on the floor and what kind of value they're bringing, and how we can keep them into those tools. So continue to leverage those tools. It's the right tool for the right job, and not necessarily let's try to pick one tool that can do every single thing. Pace of change. Again, kind of back to the process a little bit, but things are changing very rapidly, and being able to adapt to that, and automation becomes a major key to being able to drive agility to your infrastructure. And then traditional tools versus modern application needs. So this is kind of summarizes some of the stuff we already touched on. Your tooling and everything in most cases is going to change in some degree, and sometimes that's challenging depending on what those business processes are, what technology is in place today. Can it be automated? We go back to talking about APIs. Does it have an API? Those are things that you kind of have to start assessing, and depending on where you have some of those challenges, it might mean something different for you or the business as far as where you need to transform to get further up that maturity model. So IT culture war. I really like this slide because it kind of highlights two different ways of approaching IT, right? So developers, probiotics, infrastructure engineers, antibiotics. And this isn't necessarily prescriptive, but what we see is developers typically have a more proactive approach, and a lot of it's just the nature of their process, and infrastructure is a lot of times more reactive. So I know that harmonizes with a lot of our customers, just having to consistently fight fires. And we kind of put this chart together, and it kind of divides the two, at least in a traditional sense. And this isn't everybody, but there are a lot of things that we see. So developers like to leverage new technology to solve problems. Infrastructure engineers, we see a lot of times are, they kind of stick with what they know. Developers kind of inherently trust OEM salespeople, products. Infrastructure engineers a lot of times have a better relationship with those types of folks. Developers learn technology by using it. Infrastructure folks are more averse to things that aren't familiar. Developers not attached to work performing or technology consume, they kind of fail fast, if you summarize that. We see a lot more stickiness, if you will, on the infrastructure side as things that they design, implemented, things that they're comfortable with, that they really like. We see developers taking more risks. Again, it's just naturally more part of their process. Infrastructure folks are more risk averse typically. Developers are more free to use open source, or they like to leverage open source to achieve goals. And infrastructure folks typically are they're more focused on ensuring that they have enterprise grade support, for almost everything. And whether that's not necessarily, this is again not a personal attack on anybody or any role. Again, this is just what we see, and it's not like this in every single everyone we talk to. But it's good to kind of level set and get people thinking about, yeah, I do this. No, that's not me. But it's important to kind of throw this out and start blending a lot of this stuff together, even on both sides, and moving forward kind of as a team, understanding the technology, the practices and technologies that work on each side, and breaking down those silos. So what does this mean for me, right? The number one most common misconception that we come across is people being afraid that they're going to be out of a job. And this is absolutely never, ever the case. From an automation perspective, almost 100% of the time, what we see is people, they have to get out of their comfort zone a little bit to, maybe learn some new things, learn some new tools. But for the most part, once the business, when you start moving up that maturity model and the business is, seeing IT as an enabler, again, not as a cost center, there becomes a greater need for people that know automation, understand automation, and can help, reduce that time to deliver by integrating with additional platforms. So it absolutely never means almost that we've seen being automated out of a job. Again, so learning to manage, what it does mean is learning to manage infrastructure with new tools and new ways most of the time. So concepts like infrastructure as code, version control systems like Git, so GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, things like that. Kind of keeping your scripts in version control systems, working with developers, understanding what their application requirements are from an infrastructure perspective. We talked a lot about being self-documenting, potentially learning to become proficient enough, I'd like to key in there, in a programming or scripting language. So are you going to be expected to become a full-blown developer? No, absolutely not. That might help, sure, but I say proficient enough because it means knowing something well enough that you're comfortable reading and understanding the logic, maybe, or you're comfortable with taking somebody else's code that's working next to you and making some changes to it, and getting it to do what you want it to do, or maybe debugging or troubleshooting the logic in something. So again, proficient enough in a language, whether it be programming or scripting. Understanding more about the application development lifecycle, absolutely key, and something that in the customers that we've helped move all the way up that maturity model, this becomes hand in hand. It becomes second nature. We have developers and infrastructure folks, hand in hand, and the infrastructure folks understand fully what the application developers are focused on, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the business is more concerned with the application and what that application is doing. That's where the business value is at. It's not necessarily in the infrastructure underneath. And sometimes that's harder for some folks to swallow than others, but it really is the truth. So understanding that and working and building that relationship with developers to understand what their requirements are is absolutely key. And then overall, just how to understand to better align infrastructure decisions with business strategy. So that kind of dovetails with what I really was just talking about. So taking and kind of crossing the fence, really understanding what your business requirements are and how those align with your various infrastructure efforts. Okay, everything as a service. So automation accelerates service delivery, right? So in this slide down here, we have, this is just an example, high-level view of an end-to-end business process. So we have, a project starts, usually there's some kind of requirements gathering, There's some type of infrastructure design that typically occurs, at least to some degree, whether it be physical infrastructure, networking, security, firewall rules, who owns what. There's a ticket that gets placed for infrastructure. Some capacity planning that happens. That infrastructure gets deployed along with, different management tools, or it gets integrated with different management tools, monitoring, things like that. There's some other add-ons that typically get added potentially by another team. And then that request is closed and the notification goes to the end user, whoever requested it. And this bar at the bottom here really highlights where automated deployment SLA. So all the way down here is what we're seeing on where automation takes over and can run that from end to end. So again, you're still going to have, and what we see now, you still typically have, project initiation, requirements gathering, infrastructure design to some degree before that ends up getting placed. But as you start moving up that maturity model, this automated deployment SLA, or at least what can be automated, that starts moving over to the left there as you start defining and maturing your service catalog. And what we have up here, and we pull this from Lean, if anyone's familiar with Lean and Lean Six Sigma concepts, similar concepts, we call it the total lead time. So each individual task that happens down here, and if you deconstruct these, there's tons of different manual tasks that happen all the way down here. And if you were to take a look at each one of those tasks, there's two components that we look at. There's wait time and then there's work time. So the work time is the time spent actually performing that given task. So whether it be deploying the virtual machine, configuring the firewall rule, configuring DNS, whatever that individual step is, we call that the actual work time. The wait time, though, for that task really varies depending on, X number of factors. Maybe it's a different team. Maybe you're busy fighting fires. There's other priorities. So the wait time is the total wait time that any one person or team, after they get the request to work on that task, that wait time is all the time that passes up to that work time. And if we put all these together, we call that the total lead time. And collectively, we call this the actual value stream. So where automation comes into play, for example, you take blueprint orchestration. So, picking from, if we talk about like a service catalog, for example, you take all this stuff and you go from months, we say months to minutes, right? So you're back to being a digital enabler. So you're a business partner and no longer a cost center, fully operating service broker mentality. And you have a blueprint that actually captures this entire value stream and all of the tasks within it. And you're operating that up through some type of, maybe IT service automation platform. So infrastructure as a service, X as a service. It's being consumed from a GUI or command line or an API, depending on who is requesting that. So your customers being maybe internal IT, other infrastructure teams or developers, or maybe the business. And then again, speed, days and minutes, stability. It's very repeatable. It's self-documented, and from a compliance and control standpoint, it's a standard process. So again, driving that risk portfolio down even lower by automating and taking all the manual steps required that are kind of that happen during all these different tasks. So becoming a service provider, and a lot of these things are things that we kind of talked about. So again, months to minutes, automation of tasks, orchestration of processing, you're reducing your costs and enabling growth. Standardization of services. You're reducing your risk by improving consistency. It's the absolute foundation for IT as a service. You're aligning with best practices. From a scalability standpoint, the best tool for the job, right? So not necessarily saying, hey, we're going to pick one and go with it. Let's talk about what the best tool for the job is, and that likely is going to mean different tools. And then alignment within, whatever organizationally you're in or from higher up. So again, back to that business relationship. And then what are we seeing as far as successful transformation? So top of that maturity model, enterprise agility, enterprise agile frameworks, mature service management, digital enabler, business differentiation. So the business is actually driving growth through the efficiency of the IT services and subsequently infrastructure that runs underneath. You're driving, enabling innovation. You're embracing change. A lot of things that traditional companies may or may not be familiar with. Continuous integration and delivery. So again, kind of back to that application development life cycle, but kind of applied overall. So improving customer experience, adapting rapidly changing markets, becoming that true differentiator, and allowing your business to innovate faster. So just to kind of finalize, I'm going to zip through a couple of these on how we can actually help. So from a strategy alignment standpoint, we have a framework we call the MAT framework: modernize, automate, transform. And at the bottom, we kind of see more technology focused, and as you mature up the top, it's more business focused. So modernizing infrastructure and process. You're automating your infrastructure, but also focused on application delivery, transforming. So again, from monolithic and traditional infrastructure to a service-based model. And some of the things on the right, DevOps, containers, continuous delivery, microservices, just some of the examples as you move from being more technology focused to more business focused. Again, up that maturity model. So from a services and solutions standpoint, we have a number of advisory services, so strategic transformation roadmap. So we talked about people, process, technology, evaluating the use of cloud, financial modeling, strategic alignment, prioritization of initiatives. So again, coming in, helping you understand where you're at and where you want to go. Different kinds of IT operations assessment. So tools assessments. We talked about right tool for the right job, process capabilities for delivering third-party platform apps, service management approach, DevOps. So aligning your devs and infrastructure teams to help build, deploy, and operate, and determining what technology is the best fit for what your requirements are. From a professional services standpoint, a lot of cloud-native platform plan and design. So gathering requirements, designing infrastructure, including cloud, whether that's private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, whatever your different tool chains. So developer and infrastructure tools, continuous delivery, integration, automation. We have cloud-native implementation services. So we can come in and help you deploy and configure public and private cloud services and platforms, things like including PKS, OpenShift, Docker, DevOps coaching, operations management, and then various levels of integration, from low level to enterprise wide, from automation, orchestration, and cloud platforms. And that is really all I have for today. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. And if not, I really appreciate your time, and hopefully you guys found this valuable. And if you have any questions, even not at this time, but you come up with something, absolutely feel free to reach out to us. You can again, you can find me on Twitter, on GitHub. Shoot me a question. we'd love to help. I had one question about availability of the slide deck. I did forget to mention this was recorded and will be available on YouTube. So if anyone's looking for the content, we will be making edits and making that publicly available. Okay. There's no more questions. So again, really appreciate your time, and hope to talk to you guys in the future. Thanks again.